very good morning to you.
Hey, morning, Mike. Morning to your listeners and viewers.
Good to see you. Shall we start with this Rudakubana case? I mean, he's going to be sentenced at 11 o'clock this morning. By all accounts and all the people we've spoken to, it looks very much like he won't be sentenced as an adult. He could be if the government changed the laws, because I think in certain circumstances like this, where the crime is so heinous and he committed it literally 13 days, I think, before his 18th birthday, surely that particular rule should be changed or lifted.
I mean, I don't know the ins and outs of that, to be honest, and it might be that I think anything that distracts us from looking at the core issues here, I think, that's up for the judges. I'm more concerned about the bizarre way that the government has dealt with this, and the bizarre way that some of the mainstream media are now saying it's somehow Amazon's fault.
Right.
When, as if knives are impossible to get hold of in our society, and if he hadn't been able to buy it for another 2 weeks on Amazon when he was 17, going on 18, somehow this wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
I despair at that sort of reporting, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be fair, that was a bit of Downing Street spin, which should have been unspun before it went in a paper.
Yeah, but surely this is so awful and so serious. Why are you lowering yourself, if you're Downing Street, to be spinning something when there are such profound issues dealing with this? And I just think one of the odd ways, there's so much odd about this case I don't like. When that Starmer said, "Oh, this is a new form of terrorism," I'm sorry, I don't understand the evidence of why he says that. It patently isn't.
Right. And also, all of this time that he spent trying to explain the definition of terrorism. I mean, you and I have been around plenty in all sorts of different situations. I think we all know what a terrorist attack is. I think we all know what terrorist motivation is. And he almost, it seems to me, has artificially constructed a sort of a cage from which he can seemingly protect himself from criticism by sort of trying to hide behind the definition of a word. I don't think it makes any sense, and the British people are not going to swallow it.
I think you're exactly right. I mean, we know what terrorism looks like, and we know what lone terror. He said this is a brand new form of terrorism. Yeah. Online self-radicalization has been happening for 15, 20 years. Right. And it might be that there's a massive overlap with mental illness, and it might be that actually this isn't Islamic. I'm very happy to believe that if that's the case. Somebody having an AQ manual, an Al-Qaeda manual about how to kill people, he may not be trying to kill people because of a belief, however twisted, in Islam. And in fact, there's some very powerful reporting in the Telegraph from a young reporter called Charlie Bentley Astor, who was looking and was arguing that actually he was looking at this sort of failed. He was looking at sort of genocides in revenge of slavery, in revenge of empire, all this sort of weird, twisted, sort of anti-colonial narrative that you get on the hard left. Now, I'm not saying that's the reason, but he had manuals and equipment, he had manuals and books on those themes. Right. So whether this is just failed assimilation, whether it's Islamic, whether it's just somebody who was very mentally unbalanced or just very evil, who wanted to do things. But the way to deal with this is not the way that the government has been doing it.
No,
frankly.
And it's certainly not the way to deal with it by withholding information, which would never in a million years have jeopardised any kind of court case, but was just being withheld for a reason which they have yet to explain, but which I think we all know was about so-called protecting minority communities. But the bottom line for me as well is that we're supposed to have things in place like Prevent, for example, to stop these kinds of people from carrying out these kinds of attacks, or at least to identify them. This guy gets 3 times referred to Prevent, and at no point does anybody there think he's dangerous.
And the worst, Lord Shaw, great point. Again, Lord Shawcross did a really good report about this just 2 or 3 years ago now, when he specifically said we were the rules around, or the view of hard right terrorism was too broad, which is why you have this ridiculous situation where a Jacob Rees-Mogg tweet is investigated by Prevent when around Islamic is too thin, is too narrow. Now, again, we don't know if Islamic is behind this, Islamist terrorism is behind this, we don't know. But there is an imbalance where people are desperately trying to say, well, there's a bit of a balance of terror because you've got left-wing terror and right-wing terror. I just think, again, that is not in balance and is not defending the people of this country.
No, exactly right. And I mean, this inquiry that's going to happen, I don't know what the terms of it are supposed to be. I don't know what they're hoping to achieve. I suspect they won't be deciding that they committed a cover-up in their own inquiry, are they?
No, and it'd be interesting to listen to your viewers and listeners to see what they make of it, because by the sounds of things, I think most people won't have faith in it, which is incredibly sad, because people should be having faith in it. The state does keep letting people down, and our political classes do keep letting people down. And, the Conservatives should be holding their hands up as well, because, you're looking at this story today, 1 in 12 illegal immigrants in London. I mean, what's worse, the numbers or the fact that they are so difficult to find because the state makes it so difficult to find out what is happening, because it seems to be desperate to avoid any criticism of a multicultural agenda. Whereas Kemi says our country is a home. It is not, it is not a hotel for people to come and claim stuff.
And of course, many of the people who are here illegally didn't necessarily come here on a small boat. They came here on a student visa and simply didn't bother going back. And we saw that happening with that terrible attack in Nottingham the other year. He was a student who had come to this country, who overstayed his welcome and then murdered a load of people. And I think we also have to take account, and I was just talking to a correspondent in Germany there, they had an attack yesterday. An Afghan man has been arrested, and they've got a series of those things happening all the time. Christmas markets being attacked, all the rest of it. I think it's time we got a grown-up conversation going about how some of the people coming from technically war zones and places of great violence where they've witnessed things, or they may even have taken part in things, these are damaged individuals who may not be capable of living a normal life in Western Europe. And so, I know that people will say that's a very small number of a big number, and that may be true. But it's a bit of a coincidence, is it not, that so many of these atrocities are carried out by people who have come from what you might describe as very violent backgrounds?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Again, there is academic evidence, because I've been reading it, to show that if you come from a war zone or if you come from a refugee camp, you are more likely to end up being violent or doing violence yourself. Now, that isn't very sound on one level, because we should be helping people in refugee camps, we know, and we should be doing the right thing. But the problem is, because you have this idiot left agenda, which Conservatives have not done enough to challenge, you have this left agenda that says anyone who comes into this country who's got brown skin is a victim. If you're non-white, you're a victim. If you're a refugee, you're a victim. If you're an illegal immigrant, you're a victim. If you're a migrant, you're a victim. Everyone seems to be a victim of the West. Everyone is a victim of Western history. The problem is, if you then have people coming into this country who are unstable, who do come from refugee zones, where we know people are more likely to be radicalized, people are more likely to have a poor correlation between mental health and violence. By doing this, we're just not looking after our own people, and we're hiding behind sort of political, what most of your listeners and viewers would call political correctness. You can call it woke, you can call it critical theory, the idea that to be white is racist, to question that is racist, the white society is racist, our history is racist, and anyone who challenges that is racist. This is a crazy world that we need to challenge, and the problem is that too many people in the Labour Party, in the Lib Dems, in the BBC, in some of the left-wing media, they just imbibe this and they believe it either explicitly or implicitly, and it is doing real damage to our society now.
It totally is. I mean, we speak to, on a regular basis, a guy called Alan Duncan, who's a documentary filmmaker, who was just recently out in Syria looking for Shamima Begum, found her. She didn't want to talk to him, funnily enough, but he said the camps there are absolutely riddled with ISIS players. ISIS hasn't gone anywhere. They're still there in massive numbers.
And you get those people, and somebody in that camp is going to be given 5 or 10 grand to get across the border, to get into Kent, to get into Dover, and set them up with a phone, or 99% of the time they will go to some kind of cell. That is organised terror. That is not self-radicalised. That is not just very damaged people getting here. And again, as the point keeps being made by your listeners and viewers, we don't know who is coming into this country. And just to say to somebody, but we'll process you just because you come here illegally, is just crazy, because it is bad for our country. And if you come here illegally, you break the law, and I'm sorry, you should be going back. And again, on asylum, there are no limits, there's no caps. And what we should be doing, and one of the things I was trying to suggest to the Conservatives before the last election, you have a cap on asylum. You take 10 or 20,000 people a year who you think you can deal with, who you think you can, integrate into this country, but you don't take just some bloke who's been given 5, 10 grand by ISIS or a criminal gang in Syria or Libya. You take people that have gone through the UN. I think, like you, Mike, the UN's a pretty failed organisation.
Yeah.
But if you're going to take asylum seekers, let's actually take genuine ones that have come via the United Nations, not just some bloke with a weird attitude to women who rocks up in Dover because he's paid organised crime.
Yeah, absolutely right. Let's talk a little bit about Russia before I let you go. Here's John Healey yesterday in Parliament, Defence Secretary.
A foreign vessel, Yantar, is currently in the North Sea, having passed through British waters. Let me be clear. This is a Russian spy ship used for gathering intelligence and mapping the UK's critical underwater infrastructure. For the last 2 days, the Royal Navy has deployed HMS Somerset and HMS Tyne to monitor the vessel every minute through our waters. And I changed the Royal Navy's rules of engagement so that our warships can get closer and better track the Yantar. And I also want President Putin to hear this message. We see you, we know what you're doing, and we will not shy away from robust action to protect this country.
I think we finally found a Labour cabinet member, Bob, who knows what he's doing.
Yeah, and look, I don't want to be party political about this. So John Healey is potentially a good defence secretary.
He is.
I like him. I think he's very sensible. I think he's an old school right-wing Labour.
Yeah.
So he's on the right of the Labour Party, and he's a patriot. He knows the damage that the hard left do. And to give him his credit, he potentially is not going to be a bad Secretary of State. He'll be a good Secretary of State. His problem is he's not getting any money.
Yeah.
The Tories belatedly got serious about defence because we need to increase defence spending, but he hasn't got the backing. Apparently, he doesn't get on with Claire Rayner, or Claire Rayner doesn't like him.
Angela Rayner.
Sorry, and I do apologise.
He might not get on with Claire Rayner either, but
but he's not getting the money. But he's potentially good. The problem is just the wider problem with the Russians now. I don't think we're going to see negotiations bring the war to an end. The Russians want to destroy the Zelensky regime. They want to destroy Ukraine. They don't want peace with Ukraine. If they wanted peace with Ukraine, they wouldn't have invaded it. They want to destroy Ukraine, and they fight NATO in Ukraine. So that's what they're doing. Globally, they're upping their information war. We saw that with the Russians indirectly paying members of the alt-right big media community in the United States. We see that with the influence they have in European politicians, and we see that increasingly, as the head of MI5 said, in the sabotage operations that the Russians are now doing in Europe. And these are physical sabotage. So they're mapping our cables either to destroy them anyway, because we are in sub-war conflict with the Russians for the next 20 years, or as part of a shaping operation if things kick off, if they decide to attack the Baltic republics, which is going to be their way of breaking Western power and breaking NATO. And I wish collectively we were more serious about this, because there's a reasonable chance of conflict with the Russians, including us directly, in the next few years, and we've got to get wise to it, and we're still not serious about our defence.
And what do you make of Trump's intervention overnight? He's basically said to Putin, end this ridiculous war now, we can do it the easy way or the hard way. He's threatening sanctions. I mean, he's doing what he said he would do, which is to try and solve the problem.
Yeah, I mean, good for Trump. I'm not his biggest fan, but I think I love what he's doing on woke. I love what he's doing about actually having leadership and getting stuff done. And I think many of your listeners and viewers would agree with the stuff that he's getting done, especially on woke, especially on getting rid of diversity jobs and all this other stuff. And he's giving the Russians a blunt threat. He's saying either talk peace or we'll up the arms to the Ukrainians. And I think that is a very sensible attitude. And the reality is that even if Putin does talk peace, he won't want peace. And even if there are negotiations leading to a temporary settlement, Putin will simply wind in the military forms of conflict, and he will go and up the ante for other forms of conflict, so bribery, corruption, espionage, assassination. He wants Ukraine under his thumb, and the Ukrainians don't want to be under his thumb. That's the basic problem. And however much the West wants negotiation, if Putin wants to destroy Ukraine and the Ukrainians are determined to defend themselves, that is a rock and a hard place, and it's very difficult to see a way around that.
Yeah, it really is. Bob, good to talk to you. Good to see you. Thanks very much indeed. Bob Seely, former Conservative MP there, making a lot of sense about a great